privilege of having Pastor Brad Middleton joining us to share God's Word. And I'm really, really excited to have Brad back. Many of you will know Brad. Brad and his wife, Rachel, fulfill a really important part of ministry here in the life of our church as being professional counsellors that serve our community. And so we are grateful to have them in that capacity, but we're very grateful to have...
Turn it off.
We're very grateful to have him here this morning preaching. Mate, welcome. It's great. Why don't we give Brad a round of applause? Welcome here this morning. It's great to have you, mate. God bless you, mate.
Here we go. There we go. That's it. Well, thank you for the opportunity to come and share with you this morning. I really appreciate it. So it's great. I don't know about you, but after watching that video, I'm ready to go home. I think I'm done. That was just an absolutely awesome video, because the reality is Jesus does change everything. And we're as Kim has said, my wife and I are professional counsellors, and we do serve this church and the community and the wider community, and we see change on a regular basis. And so we want to say from the outset that when we do provide those services, we do so from a Christian worldview and from a biblical point of view. We really believe that Jesus is the answer, and Jesus does change everything, including relationships, as we just saw on that video. So if you have your Bibles with me, you might like to turn to Mark. We're going to be looking at Mark chapter 10 a little bit today, but before we go there, I just wanted to kind of set the scene in regards to how Jesus changes relationships. Just recently, I was sitting in a coffee shop doing my emails and doing some work as I do, and I noticed these four gentlemen were sitting there at a coffee table having, it was obviously a casual encounter, but I recognised one of them as a minister. And then as I looked at all the other three guys, I realised, these guys are all retired ministers. And I thought, they're getting together just for a casual get-together. Isn't that great? Somehow, these ministers, and I recognised them from different denominations and different places, they had come together in relationship and were just having a casual encounter. There was lots of laughing and jesting and talking. It was really, really great to see. But as I sat there, and it kind of struck me that ministers are a part of a group which I call people helping professionals. So their job is to help people. You know, most of us have an altruistic streak amongst us where we like to be good Samaritans. If we see someone in need, we like to help them. I think we've seen a little bit, just a tiny little bit of that today, where we love to help people. But ministers are in that group where their profession, their task, their job, if you like, is to actually help people. Others in that group also include people like doctors, nurses, chaplains, psychologists, social workers, counsellors, care workers, caregivers. They're all in that group, what I call people helping professionals. They're there to do the task of making sure people get the help they need. And we understand that. We often talk about how ministers and doctors and all those sort of people do their job. But I want to say to you that there's one common denominator with all of those people. If you're in the people helping profession, you do it within the sphere or within the boundary or within the environment of a relationship. You can't do that work unless there is a relationship that you have established. And we understand that. We talk about doctors having a bedside manner. What do we mean? Oh, is there any doctors in the... I better be careful what I say. Well, there's probably a few online, is there? Anyway, we talk about doctors having a bedside manner. What we mean is the way in which they relate to people, their relationship they have with their patients. We talk about counsellors and psychologists and social workers having unconditional positive regard for their clients. No matter what their clients bring to them and what scenarios they bring to them, there's a positive regard for the fact that they're reaching out for help. We talk about ministers providing personal, pastoral care. And it's all based on the relationship, the connection, this kind of bit of a history that each of those people helping professionals have with that person. There's a relationship there. It's interesting to me, though, that ministers typically are involved with some of the most significant relationship markers
throughout life. Things like baby dedications, weddings, funerals. Anybody been to any of those lately? There really are significant markers in our life. Now, I've had the privilege of conducting more than 60 weddings. It's absolutely phenomenal. You get a front row seat of pure, unadulterated love as he promises to her and she promises to him to love each other till death do us part. And I'm standing like this far from them. It's just exhilarating to see that that's how there is so much love for these couple as they stand there and do that. And then things like baby dedications, baby dedications or dedications of kids. We saw some of that this morning. It wasn't really a dedication, but Cheryl's and her team, the way in which she dedicates her life or her ministry to seeing these kids grow and foster. When you do that as a minister, baby dedications, again you see this happy couple who brought this child into this world, and their steely determination that we will bring up this child in the right way. We will do all that we can. We will use all the powers that we have to bring up this child and make sure they have a great life. It's fantastic to see. And then to walk with family and extended friends through the grief and the loss of a death. And provide opportunity to remember and reminisce about, amid the heartache, about the relationship of the person who's no longer with us. About what they meant to us. About how they impacted our lives. And how we're going to miss them because the relationship no longer exists in a physical sense. Ministers know that this work requires relationship, a connection, a presence that they have with their parishioners, as do doctors and all of those other people. But in these significant areas, ministers recognise that because they've studied the one who is the master of relationships, Jesus himself. Jesus is all about relationships. And Jesus is the way to relationship with God. And God wanted that known from the very beginning. So when God, the creator of the universe, sent his son into this world, he wanted us to know that Jesus was going to be all about relationships. And that's why he's called Emmanuel, God with us. That's what that's about. The wonder of being with someone, the wonder of being in relationship. It's no wonder God has called Jesus, they told him to name him Emmanuel, because it was going to always be about relationships. And as I've just said, we know that that's the way it is. We grow as kids and then we want to get married, we want to be in relationship with people, and we strive for that. It's a really big part of our lives. And then all throughout our life, relationship after relationship after relationship. Might be with a partner, it might be with family members, it might be with someone we meet at a social club. There's relationships everywhere. And Jesus knew that life on planet Earth for human beings was all about relationships. And there's some really wonderful things that come out of relationships. Now that all sounds fine and dandy, doesn't it? We all want to get into relationships. It's all wonderful. It's great. But you and I live in the real world. And as we saw on that video, oftentimes there's relationship breakdown. We understand there's another side of those great parts of that relationship, don't we? We recognise that it's not all beer and... can you say beer in church? It's not all beer and skills. Too late, I've already said it. Oftentimes things go wrong in relationships. While relationships can be exciting, they can also be depressing. And while relationships can be enlightening, they can also be confusing. And although there can be adventure in relationships, they can all too easily become routine. And instead of being loving, relationships can often become hostile. Dysfunction often reigns supreme. and disputes often run deep in relationships. Is this hitting home with anybody? Or am I really dreaming? I know I'm not dreaming because we've experienced it. We see it. That which was meant to be something that was so beautiful, so pure, and that which we understand to be so pure, and we've experienced to be so pure, can often degenerate into dysfunction and hostility. And because most of us default to the negative, that's our default position, we can very quickly in relationships become judgmental and let resentment build, and bitterness begins to sweep into that loving relationship. It happens so subtly and so easily. On occasions, it's not so subtle, but as a general rule, it just happens slowly, little by little, over time. So what do we do with that? Can Jesus, this Emmanuel, God with us, who was all about relationships, have an impact or change the dysfunction? Is it really possible that a man who came 2,000 years ago would understand with all that goes on in our relationships these days with technology and with the rate, the pace of life that we live and all of that stuff, could a man that lived 2,000 years ago really change or impact the dysfunction and the disability that we find in many of our relationships? Well, because we're in the church and we love to be positive, we'd like to say the answer is yes, of course. And the topic is Jesus changes everything. Well, yes, of course. But my answer is, well, that depends. It really does depend. Can Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, have an impact or change this dysfunction? Well, that depends. Now, you've heard the story of the journalist who interviewed a couple who'd been married just over 60 years. You heard that story? No? Oh, okay. So, this journalist was interviewing this couple who'd been married just over 60 years, and they were saying, so could you give us the idea, what are some of the things that you think held you together over that 60 years? What has made your marriage so successful? And the answer was this. Well, unconditional love, absolute honesty, and transparency, and a good sense of humour. Humour, the journalist asked. Yes, said the man. You have to get over yourself at times, not take yourself too seriously. Anybody tried that one in their relationship? Oh, I see, said the journalist. And then the journalist went on to say, and in all those years, have you ever considered divorce? This is over 60 years of marriage. Have you ever considered divorce? No. No, I don't think I've ever considered that. Murder, maybe, but divorce, no. Now, how does it get to that? 60 years of marriage, the most important things are unconditional love, absolute honesty and transparency, and a good sense of humour. How does it get to that stage? Now, I think he was jesting a little bit, but I've been married nearly 34 years. And I'll just stop there. But it's not always beer and skittles in marriage, Things go wrong. Things get hard. And sometimes we want to go, why? What do we do with that? What does Jesus say about that? It amazes me that when we sit, Rachel and I do a fair bit of marriage work, and we kind of sit together with couples. I guess we're a little bit different in a lot of the stuff we do, in the sense that her and I sit together with couples, so we have kind of 4 people in the counselling room, so that gives a bit of a different dynamic. But the reality is, it amazes us that how many people show up and they think that they've been married, we get this a lot. We've been married 14, 15, 16 years, and this is the last-ditch effort. If this doesn't work, we're done. And we're like, oh, okay. No pressure. So we just start asking a few questions. We're like, okay, you've been married, let's say, 14 years. Have you ever done a personality test? Do you know what your personality is and what your personality is? No. Okay. Have you ever done maybe love languages? Do you know what each other's love languages are? And usually the answer to that is, no. Occasionally we get a yes and we go, great, fantastic, how do you use them? They're like, use them? What do you mean use the love languages? Okay. What about communication? Have you ever done any communication workshops or, say, conflict resolution strategy seminars? You done any of that? Well, we did a bit for work, but not really in regards to marriage. Okay. So you got together, you love one another, you come from different backgrounds, you have different personalities, you probably have different love languages, you don't really understand how conflict works, and you don't really understand some good strategies for communication, and you think love's going to conquer all. Have a seat. Oftentimes we go into relationships without the skills and the tools that we need. So in relationships, oftentimes dispute arises. And Jesus actually has something to say to that. If you have your Bibles, turn to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. Because yes, a man 2,000 years ago did have something to say about this. Mark chapter 10, verses 1 to 9. From there, Jesus went to the area of Judea across the Jordan. A crowd of people, as was so often the case, went along. And he, as he so often did, taught them. Pharisees came up intending to give him a hard time. They asked, "Is it legal for a man to divorce his wife?" Jesus said, "What did Moses command?" They answered, "Moses gave permission to fill out a certificate of dismissal and divorcement from her." Jesus said, "Moses wrote this command only as a concession for your hard-hearted ways. In the original creation, God made male and female to be together. Because of this, a man leaves his mother and father, and in marriage he becomes one flesh with a woman. No longer two individuals, but forming a new unity. Because God created this organic union of the two sexes, no one should desecrate his art by cutting them apart." So, here's Jesus, 2,000 years ago, giving some commentary and recommendations on divorce and marriage. Can Jesus change a relationship? Well, that actually depends if you're prepared to take Jesus' recommendations and do the work. Look what he says there. Jesus said, "Moses wrote the command of divorcement only as a concession to your hard-hearted ways." Now that's very interesting. Only as a concession. Put it in the BJV. Do you know what the BJV is? That's the Bradley John version. Okay? What that means is check your heart. If there's a dispute in your relationship, what's going on in here? Check your own heart. Jesus' recommendation is, Moses wrote this concession, Moses wrote this command only as a concession because you have hard hearts. The disputes arise, the difficulty comes because your heart is so hard, every time you want to communicate and connect, you repel one another. Whereas if you're a little softer and a little gentler, you come together and you might find some unity. So yes, Moses wrote the bill of divorcement, but if that's all you're interested in, you've missed the boat. The real answer to your problem is your hard hearts. If your heart's hard, Jesus said, make the changes. Get the help you need. Get back to the softness and affection that you once knew in your relationship. Now, please hear me well. That's not an easy thing to do. Jesus knew exactly what he was saying when he said, your hard-hearted ways. Because there's work to do there. A hard heart takes time and change to soften. Now, blokes, you know what that's like. You know, you're working on the car, you kind of get to a bolt and it's been rusted on for a while. What do you put on it? DB40, ARC, no, what's it called? CRC, what did you say? Whatever it is. And then you walk away and you go and have a cup of coffee, right? Because you know that it's too hard for you to try and get off, And you have to let the stuff penetrate in over time before you can undo the nut, right? I can see all the blokes nodding. Yeah. Ladies, believe me, it's true. I used to have Holden. Sometimes it takes a lot of work and a lot of energy and a lot of time before relationships can be renewed. Jesus says here there's two separate individuals attempting to become one. They have to work through things. Maybe there's forgiveness involved. Maybe there's forgiveness on your part that needs to happen. And forgiveness is hard work. It involves discussion, it involves confrontation, and it may even involve getting an impartial party to give some outside input so that we can see things a lot clearer. Maybe that'd be what it's involved in, to bring some form of resolution to the dispute. Jesus said the problem is your hearts are hard. But it doesn't stop there. You may need to learn to trust the other person in relationship again. However, trust and forgiveness are two different things. Trust and forgiveness, trust can't simply be bought by applying forgiveness. You can't just pay out a bit of forgiveness and expect trust to happen. Trust is typically earned over time. And it can't just be bought by forgiveness. But anyway, that's a sermon for another time. There you go, Kim, you can do forgiveness soon. Or you might have already done it. Have you already done it? You've already done it? Oh, there you go. Am I on the money? Oh, good. Okay. Jesus knew about offence and disputes in relationships. He says that resolution starts with you looking at your own heart. It involves discussion, confrontation, and maybe even forgiveness. So yes, Jesus can bring changes if you are prepared to do the work. Now we all want, because we live in this society, we all want the easy microwave solution. You pull out the frozen dinner, you stab it with the fork, you stick it in the microwave for 5 minutes, you walk away, you go and get your plates and your knives and your forks, you come back, hey presto, dinner. 5 minutes, tops. It's not as good as Mum's home-cooked roast, but still does the same job. We like easy. Relationships are not easy. But let me tell you, they're worth it if you put in the hard work. Jesus knew that. He said, yes, Moses wrote a bill of divorcement. You can do that if you want. But it's only a concession because of your hard hearts. You want true relationship? Do the work. Change your heart. But it's not just marriage relationships where problems arise, although a lot of them arise there. There are still other types of relationships. What about the less intimate type of relationships? Are there problems there? What about relationships you might have in your community group, your church, your club, your local soccer or football or basketball club? Surely they're just casual relationships where you naturally and easily support one another and do activities together like golf or basketball or sewing or craft or whatever it is you do. What could go wrong there? Surely those are just kind of platonic, natural, casual relationships. Many years ago, I was involved with a not-for-profit organisation, and they called it a busy bee or a working bee because they'd been donated a whole bunch, like a very large sum, like I'm talking a bogey load, truckload of carpet tiles. And they decided that they were going to lay new carpet tiles in this building. So they called this busy bee to do that. So all of us came along, we took out the furniture, and we did all the stuff to go with it, and then we started laying the carpet tiles. It was all going swimmingly well. It was absolutely fantastic until the foreman came and said, okay, we're just about to go up to the foyer. We're going to use these coloured carpet tiles for the foyer. And, like when we have formal meetings here, we actually get, because we'll, weddings and, community events and that sort of stuff, we're actually going to make the aisle down the middle of these different coloured carpets so it matches with the foyer. We're like, oh, that sounds great. So we start laying all these things. And it's really good. And then this other leader from the organisation comes in, and he was not a happy camper, I can tell you. So he comes up to the foreman and he says, what's going on here? He said, well, we're just laying carpet tiles. He said, no, you're not. We're like, okay. So what erupted was this full-on yelling match between these two leaders of the same organisation. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, most of the volunteers left, a few of us stayed around to watch the show. I hasten to add that organisation no longer exists. I think those leaders had a few issues, maybe a few personal problems, or maybe their priorities were quite askew, if you like. It appeared maybe one or both of them had some misplaced priorities when it came to serving this not-for-profit organisation. They weren't in a marriage relationship, they weren't in an intimate relationship, it was just a casual relationship that they were in. So can Jesus make a difference when priorities are askew in a relationship? Well, again, yes, but that depends. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? Can I just say it and we'll be done? Maybe I won't. Matthew chapter 19, verses 16 to 29. Jesus actually encountered this very same thing. Matthew 19, 16 to 22. Another day, a man stopped Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" So this was something that was pretty important. What do I have to do to get eternal life? Jesus said, "Why do you question me about what's good? God is the one who's good. If you want to enter the life with God, just do what he tells you." The man asked, "What in particular?" Jesus said, "Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, honour your mother and father, and love your neighbour as yourself." The young man said, "I've done all that." Oh, I'd like to have him in the counselling room. "What's left?" he says. "Well, if you want to give it all you've got," Jesus said, so in other words, if you really want this, go sell all your possessions, give everything to the poor, all your wealth will then be in heaven, then come follow me. Now, it's interesting to me that I do this thing with people where I kind of step into the text. We kind of read and go, Jesus said, go sell all your possessions, all your wealth will be in heaven, and then come follow me. Do you think kind of Jesus was that bland? Or maybe I'm just an excitable chap, I don't know. But when I step into the text there and I think I put myself in Jesus' shoes or put myself in the young man's shoes, I can imagine Jesus stand there and say, "Great, you think you've done everything? Good. You've got one more thing to do. If you can just get over this hurdle, your life's going to be fantastic. So just go and sell all your possessions. Your wealth will be in heaven, and then come follow me. And together we can work. Together we can do ministry. Together we can make this thing happen." Or is that reading too much into it? I don't know. I think that's what Jesus would do. He was excited about relationships. Remember, he's Emmanuel, God with us, being with people. Wouldn't it be wonderful if he could have got this young fella and taught him all of that stuff? Of course, the verse goes on to say this is the last thing the young man expected to hear, and so crestfallen he walked away. He was holding on too tight to a lot of things, so he couldn't bear to let it go. This young chap wanted in, and he thought Jesus had the answers. And Jesus did have the answers. But Jesus' answers involved some soul searching. Jesus' answers involved some nasal gazing, a willingness to rework his current thought patterns and his current priorities. A willingness to say, all of that is good, but it's second rate, it's not priority compared to what I really want, and that's eternal life. His relationship with the divine was being hampered by his misguided priorities. And that can be us too. Sometimes our relationship with the divine can be hampered because our priorities are askew. Our relationships with one another can be hampered because our relationships are askew. And in most organisations, relationships involve an element of give and take. We get involved in the soccer club because we want our kids to play soccer. We go to a basketball referee because we want a referee so the kids can have a good game of basketball. And then we won't be yelling at the referees because they didn't make the call. We get involved in other organisations. Some people get involved in other organisations and they serve and they serve and they serve and they serve to the detriment of their own family. And they sacrifice their own family for the sake of the organisation. Priorities. sometimes they can be askew. In fact, nowhere are skew priorities more evident than within a local church. There are lots of members in churches today whose priorities are askew. Not this church, of course. They believe the church is there for their own personal benefit. This becomes evident when their complaints begin to arise about the music or the songs or the colour of the carpet or whatever it might be. They think the church exists for them. But in actual fact, if you want to understand the priorities, Jesus is the example. He was the creator of the universe, yet born in a stable. King of the Jews, they put on his cross, yet no palace, or not even a home of his own. He took on the form of a servant rather than being served. And if you really want to understand the main priority of the church, take some time to look at the church history and you'll see weaved through there that the church is one of the very, 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 if not the only organisation which exists and works entirely for the express benefit of its non-members. The express benefit of its non-members. In other words, we don't get anything in return. We're doing all this for their benefit. We put on carol services for their benefit. We give money because that's what God calls us to do, so we can have a church and a community centre where people can come for their benefit. No praise needed. No thanks necessary. That's the priority of the church. Can Jesus change relationships in which the priorities are a little askew? Well, yes. But it depends on me. It depends on you. So, if you recognise in any of your relationships, and you're interested in any negativity in any of your relationships, and you're interested in taking Jesus' advice, then are you willing to honestly assess the hardness of your heart? In your intimate family relationships? Are you willing to do the hard work involved, including discussion, confrontation, and maybe even opening yourself up to outside, impartial people to get assistance if you need? Are you prepared to work at forgiveness and rebuilding trust? Are you willing to review your priorities and make the required redirection? Jesus changes relationships, yes, but it depends on whether you're willing to let him in. Are you willing to have Jesus with you, the Emmanuel, God with us, as you navigate the difficulties in your relationships? Some have, and some did. Let's just finish by reading Luke chapter 7. Verses 11 to 17. Jesus encountered another relationship issue. Not long after Jesus went to the village of Nain, his disciples were with him, along with quite a large crowd. As they approached the village gate, they met a funeral procession. A woman's only son being carried out for burial, and the mother was a widow. When Jesus saw her, his heart broke. He said to her, "Don't cry." Then he went over and touched the coffin. The pallbearers stopped. He said, "Young man, I tell you, get up." And the dead son sat up and began talking, and Jesus presented him to his mother. Now stay in your seats. It's a pretty exciting story, I know. And we could go down the path of the theology about raising people and all that sort of stuff, but I don't want to. Because again, as I step into this, you know what I see? I see Jesus came across this scene and his heart was broken. Why? Because of all the broken relationship that this scenario spoke of. Remember, he's Emmanuel, God with us. He understands relationships and he's come to further relationships. and to repair relationships. Death is the end of relationship. So much grief, so much loss of relationship. And children don't die before their parents, do they? That's not the way it is. It's tragic. And this was her only son. The loneliness of losing her only son. Another broken relationship. And she's a widow. Already experienced relationship loss. So much deficit. Not to speak of the cultural isolation of those days of a widow. And then there's a large crowd. It's not just a crowd. The scripture tells us it's a large crowd. So this was a well-known person. The impact of this loss spreads far and wide. So why did Jesus' heart break? Broken relationship. It's been that way since the beginning, since the Garden of Eden, as we saw in that video. Broken relationship. Jesus intervened. He touched the coffin. A countercultural move, by the way. We won't go into that. That's a sermon for another day. And he resurrected the boy. I know. It's amazing. It's exciting. But what's even more exciting to me is that Jesus restored the relationship with his mother. That which was broken, the loss, the death, the grief, was now being renewed. He was resurrected. So here's the question for you this morning. Any of your relationships need resurrecting? Any relationship need input from someone you don't really know? Does there need to be a restoration of the relationships between you and someone who was once close but is now isolated? The results speak for themselves if you let Jesus in, as this woman did. The last verse of that passage, they are all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. He has come to help his people. Not remove them from the Roman rule, but to restore their relationships. So does Jesus change relationships? Yes. But it depends if you let him. He is Emmanuel, God with us. He's all about relationship. And he wants to be with you amid whatever heartache or whatever pain is in your relationship right now. But the question for you this morning is, will you let him in? Let's pray together. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity we've had just to look into your word today. I pray that you take away anything at all that's not being helpful. Leave only that which is going to encourage us and spur us on. So, Lord, we thank you that you love us, you care for us, and that you are the great Emmanuel, God with us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.